So I'm very pleased to introduce this session, Haven for All, Climate Resilient Affordable Housing. And this first part of the session will be a panel discussion about the perhaps surprising leadership role of the affordable housing community in building decarbonization. It's going to be with Bomee Jung moderating and Chris Benedict and Laura Humphrey serving as panelists. So I will pass it off to Bomee.
Hi, thank you for joining us this morning. I'm Bomee Jung, and I'm here with Chris Benedict and Laura Humphrey. So just to get us going with some intros, Chris, you brought Passive House to New York multifamily years ago. So could you give us a short synopsis of how you went from doing conventional buildings to working on Passive House?
Well, actually, Bomee, I never did a conventional building. When I started my office, I came right out of the gate, changing city specifications, but they were minor at the time. It was just materials, but I also introduced sealed combustion boilers. But as time moved on and I started learning from the building scientists in our country, Canada and Europe, I was able to add to my repertoire. So by the time Passive House was showing up in New York, I could recognize it.
Yeah, and great. Thank you for that, Chris. And Laura, you're now at a developer, but your professional journey has taken you from government to a utility and now again to multifamily ownership. How has that journey brought you around to Passive House?
Yeah, thanks, Bomee. You know, with all of those different roles, you're looking at buildings at a programmatic level. So whether it's at the state level, thinking about all the multifamily buildings in New York State, or at the utility territory level, or now at an owner, thinking about all the buildings in our portfolio. When you look at all of those buildings all together, you really are looking for how you can impact all of them and how you can really achieve durable savings. And traditionally, energy efficiency, while really important, has always had a hard time maintaining the savings or achieving the savings that it's modeled for. And that always created sort of a hunger on people who are creating these programs or thinking about things at that scale for like, what is the thing that we could do that would really last? And that sort of train of thought made it so that when Passive House started to be in our awareness, at least for me, like, 10 years ago, then all the lights started to go off and it really started to click for us that this is something that could be really durable, that could really deliver on what it's saying it's going to deliver, and then keep that level of savings for a really long time.
Yeah, thank you. And so, just for the audience to have a little sort of a better sense of everybody on the panel. So obviously this is a panel about affordable housing. My background is that I've been working on affordable housing and green building and affordable housing for almost 20 years. And I think of myself as a houser first. And so the thing that really spoke to me about Passive House was sort of, looking at a bit, probably by, touring the work that, Chris was doing as a designer, I kind of came to this realization that really the things that Passive House delivers that are, beyond just the energy savings, it's the quality of life benefits and sort of, even just the acoustic isolation and all of these sorts of things. I felt like this is, in housing, we talk about housing quality a lot. And to me, this was an easy way to talk about like the state of the art in housing quality, not just in terms of energy saving. So we have a houser, and then a real estate developer, and then a designer here. So just to kick off the discussion, again, for context, in New York City, I don't know if everybody knows that, everybody outside of New York City, I don't know if folks know that in New York, most affordable housing new construction projects in New York are now Passive House, even though there's no requirement for that. And historically, affordable housing has been leading the rest of the field in terms of adopting green building practices. So let's take a quick minute and explain how we got to this point.
Sure,
Laura,
I can kick it off
on that.
Yeah, I think, just some level setting too about what makes affordable housing distinct, and especially in New York, which may be very and I know is different than especially the way it functions in Europe and other countries, is that it's not all of it, but much of it is privately held. So it's not necessarily public, although we do have a lot of that as well. And there's three things that really make this sector different than other either housing sectors or building sectors. One, it's often mission driven. And so just to Bomee's point, you really are thinking about the quality of life of the residents for the long haul. You also generally have the same ownership and position for a long period of time, which means that you're interested in how the building's performing for a long period of time, not just a short period of time. And then compounded with that, you also have generally very short or very small operating budgets. So you don't want to you're not able really to make major investments, continuously throughout the building. And I think all three of those together really led it to be a very good fit for Passive House. Again, because you're making your investments up front, they're hitting both the social and the environmental needs, as well as minimizing operating costs, which is incredibly important by reducing, electric and probably eliminating gas usage altogether. So I think all three of those things together really made it, kind of the perfect fit. And then on top of that, of course, the policy changes around us, how our agencies that we work with, the housing agencies, encourage us to do Passive House, and how code and things like that has changed as well.
Yeah, I think New York City also has a very robust ecosystem around affordable housing. And I think the governmental entities were very consciously trying to push the envelope on green building and use affordable housing as a market force, right, to lead the market. And so so both of you have done Passive House projects, and so I'm wondering, like, what are some of the unlikely or unexpected lessons that you've learned from working on Passive House Affordable? Chris, you want to start with on that one?
Sure, yeah. Well, one pleasant thing is that it seems that contractors really get it. The things that you need to do in the building are easy to do, reasonably easy to do, maybe a little different than how it's always been done, but pretty easy. And in new construction, we all know that, getting out of the ground is probably the hardest part of the job. And Passive House doesn't have a lot to do with that except insulating the foundation. So it turns out that it's not the big deal that at first it appeared to be. So that was a very pleasant surprise. Something in the tenant in place world is that, while the contractors are getting it, building it, tenants in place aren't getting it at all. And they're not understanding an intervention into their home. And this is a whole frontier, figuring out how to work with tenants in place, because we know this is the biggest job to do. So, some thoughts just off the cuff are, before you go into a building, make them a fabulous lobby. We usually like to do the lobby last after we're working our way out of the building. No, start there. Give them something great. And then be extremely attentive to tenant needs, and do or say what you're going to do, and do it as you said you were going to do it, because those kind of promises become extremely important.
Yeah. How about you, Laura? What unexpected lessons or unlikely lessons?
Well, I mean, maybe it seems obvious to other folks, but I think the co-benefits aspect has been something that we keep on learning lessons of now that we're operating the buildings. We built the Passive House buildings, and now we're operating them, and that's new days for us. I think new days for a lot of people. And so just some things that come to mind, last year, there were terrible wildfires in Canada that were impacting the air quality in New York pretty significantly. And, we also operate buildings that are in some of the highest asthma rates in the city, highest rates of asthma hospitalizations. And so, we're surveying the tenants, we're talking to the property managers, making sure people are okay. And in the Passive House buildings, like, people didn't even know it was a problem. Like, they were like, oh, wait, what's happening?
Mhm.
And, that was not the case in the other buildings where people were really struggling to breathe, honestly. And so there's things like that, that it improves indoor air quality and that it does these things, but then you actually see it happen and you realize how valuable that is.
Yeah, and were the residents putting two and two together in terms of like the reason why they didn't experience the air quality issues is because they were in a passive house building, do you think?
I'm not sure. It's a really good question. Yeah.
Well, Chris, you mentioned tenant in place as sort of the next thing around the corner. Are there other sort of challenges that that are ahead of us? Again, I think that we're in the affordable housing community. We're often right in the front lines of trying new things, and we've really established the history of doing that in New York. So what's next for you all?
Well, I think that we really need to be focusing on all the different building types and what's appropriate for each type of building, and really refining the enclosure approaches, the mechanical system approaches. There are some difficulties with the existing buildings or even new construction with some of the mechanical systems that we like to use with Passive House. Ventilation is really a bear. It's easier to do in a single family home than it is in apartments. There's still a lot of work to be done. We're on the side pushing certain ideas, trying to figure out ways to get the ventilation piece of Passive House way more affordable than what it is right now. And there's lots of room for innovation and new ideas, which is really, I think, why my profession has been so attracted to Passive House. The way it was set up was, here's a model. It tells you what you need, but you can play around with it and have a number of different answers, and you're design-wise free. And that was very, very appealing to architects. And one of the great reasons why Passive House is really hitting the road and running here.
Laura, what about for you?
In terms of, what are the next big challenges, big things?
Yeah.
So definitely echoing existing buildings. We operate a lot of existing buildings, and we almost never are working in buildings that are vacant or have any significant vacancy at all, maybe like one unit or something. But we really want to tackle this problem, and we know that we have to. And so it's just very early days for us to figure out what are the best ways into this, whether it's a phased approach or something more comprehensive all at once. I think this is something that we're just thinking a lot about, how to kind of come in from the outside, potentially. But I think it's very early days, and I'm really excited for what's going to happen. But I think it's always challenging too, because every existing building is different, that we don't have, while there's lots of shared characteristics, there's always enough different that it's really hard to kind of extrapolate, oh, this worked here, so it's going to work there. And so it's going to take a couple of really great projects or more than that for us to feel like we can really rinse and repeat and do it confidently. But it's definitely something that we're excited to do.